Alex sat quietly in his room, holding a brochure from a prestigious American university in his hands. He had spent countless hours imagining what it would be like to walk across the campus, to sit in classes filled with bright minds from around the world. But that dream felt distant, nearly unreachable. Alex barely knew English, while many students around him seemed to learn the language effortlessly. For him, it felt like an insurmountable wall. His heart ached with both excitement and fear. Could he really do this? Could he learn English on his own and make his dream come true? Determined not to let go of his dream, Alex made a bold decision. He would teach himself English. Without formal classes or a tutor, he would dive into the language with the resources he had at his disposal: music, lyrics, movies, online articles. His journey had begun, and though the path ahead seemed unclear, Alex knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to give up. The excitement of his goal fueled his every step, even when the weight of doubt began to creep in. The first challenge came when he attempted to read an article online. The words blurred together, and no matter how hard he tried, he could only grasp a few basic phrases. It was overwhelming. His heart sank as frustration bubbled up inside him. The idea of learning a new language seemed like a cruel joke. Could someone like him, who barely understood the simplest of sentences, ever hope to master English? For a brief moment, Alex thought about giving up, but the image of that American university, the dream he had nurtured for so long, pushed him forward. He realized that he needed to approach his learning differently. If reading articles was too difficult, maybe he could try something more enjoyable. That's when the idea of using music hit him. Alex had always loved music, and now he saw it as a potential tool for learning. He found an English song he liked and decided to break it down, line by line, translating each word slowly. At first, it was tedious work, but as the song's meaning began to emerge, a small spark of victory ignited inside him. It was a tiny step, but it was progress. That small victory gave him a sense of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, he could do this. But even with this new method, Alex couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. None of his friends shared his dream of studying abroad, and while they encouraged him, they didn't understand the emotional toll it took. The long hours of struggling with words and phrases left him feeling alone, as if he were walking a path no one else could see. The loneliness deepened his doubts. Was this journey even worth it? Would he ever reach his goal? The thoughts weighed heavily on his mind, but something within him, a quiet, stubborn resilience, kept him going. In search of more ways to immerse himself in English, Alex turned to movies. He began watching American films with subtitles, listening carefully to the dialogues, and matching the words he heard with the text on the screen. At first, it was incredibly slow, and he often felt frustrated that he couldn't keep up. The characters spoke too fast, and many of the words were unfamiliar. But as the days passed, he started recognizing phrases. He could piece together bits of dialogue, and though his understanding was far from perfect, it was a start. Patience became his new companion, as he realized that learning a language wasn't going to be a quick or easy process. A week into his new routine, something extraordinary happened. Alex was watching a simple scene from a movie when, for the first time, he understood everything the characters said without relying on the subtitles. It wasn't a complex conversation, just a casual exchange between two friends, but for Alex, it was a monumental achievement. That brief moment of clarity filled him with a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, Alex saw a glimpse of what was possible. He ended the night with a quiet smile, ready to face the next challenge. The initial excitement of starting his English learning journey had faded, and Alex found himself facing the full weight of the challenge ahead. Grammar rules, sentence structures, and the endless stream of unfamiliar vocabulary began to overwhelm him. Every new concept he tried to grasp seemed to slip away just as quickly. It felt like trying to catch water with his hands. His frustration grew as he spent hours on lessons that yielded only a small understanding of the language. The joy he once felt when he translated a song or understood a movie line was now overshadowed by the enormity of what he didn't know. Some days Alex felt like he was drowning in his efforts. The more he learned, the more he realized how much he didn't understand. His notebook was filled with scribbles of half-learned words and incomplete sentences, a reflection of his current state of mind. He would stare at the pages, wondering if he was making any progress at all. More than once, he considered giving up, questioning whether his dream was even worth all the frustration and self-doubt. Yet, even in his darkest moments, something in him refused to let go completely. The feeling of inadequacy was only made worse by the ease with which others seemed to learn. Alex would scroll through social media, seeing people his age effortlessly speaking English in videos or writing fluently in posts. He couldn't help but compare himself to them. Why was it so easy for them? What did they have that he didn't? These thoughts ate away at him, making him feel inferior and questioning his own abilities. The more he compared himself, the deeper his self-doubt grew. He began to wonder if he was even capable of achieving his dream or if it was simply too big for him. One day, after hours of study, Alex hit a low point. It was as if all the frustrations, doubts, and disappointments had piled up at once. He had spent the entire afternoon trying to understand a basic grammar concept, but no matter how many times he read the explanations, it just didn't make sense. His mind felt like a tangled mess of rules and exceptions, none of which he could keep straight. In a moment of sheer frustration, he slammed his notebook shut and pushed away from his desk. For the first time, the thought of quitting didn't feel like an option, it felt like a relief. Alex spent the next few hours in a state of emotional exhaustion, his dream feeling more distant than ever before. The weight of it all seemed unbearable, and for a while he allowed himself to consider what life would be like if he stopped trying. No more late nights spent deciphering English subtitles. No more endless lists of vocabulary to memorize. It would be easier, he thought, to just let the dream go. But as tempting as the thought was, Alex couldn't shake the image of that American university campus, the dream that had sparked his journey in the first place. It still lingered in the back of his mind, quietly reminding him of why he had started. That night, Alex decided to distract himself by watching one of his favorite movies. He didn't expect to learn anything. He was simply looking for a way to escape the frustration that had consumed his day. But as the movie played, something surprising happened. Without even realizing it, Alex understood an entire conversation between the characters without needing the subtitles. The words flowed naturally in his mind, and for a brief moment, the language that had caused him so much grief felt easy. The realization hit him like a wave of relief. It was a small victory, but in that moment, it felt like the most significant one yet. His hard work, even though it hadn't felt like progress, had been paying off all along. He just hadn't seen it. That one scene, that single conversation, reignited the determination inside him. Maybe he wasn't as far behind as he thought. Maybe he could do this after all. With renewed energy, Alex paused the movie and replayed the scene, this time listening even more closely to the dialogue. He repeated the lines to himself, matching the character's words with his own voice. The next morning, Alex approached his studies with a new mindset. Instead of focusing on what he didn't know, he began to appreciate the small steps he was taking. Every word he learned, every sentence he understood, was a step closer to his goal. He decided to try something new, speaking English out loud. It was a terrifying thought. Speaking a language he wasn't comfortable with felt like exposing himself to failure. But Alex knew he had to face that fear if he wanted to improve. At first, his voice was shaky and uncertain. He would practice simple sentences in front of the mirror, cringing at every mistake and awkward pronunciation. But the more he practiced, the more his confidence grew. Even when the words didn't come out perfectly, he reminded himself that progress wasn't about perfection, it was about effort. Slowly, the fear of speaking began to fade, replaced by a sense of pride in simply trying. As the days passed, Alex found himself more willing to take risks with his learning. He started speaking English out loud, watching movies, repeating lines after the characters. He would pause the movie to practice conversations, imagining himself in the scenes. It wasn't perfect, but it was practice, and that was enough for him. Despite the progress he was making, Alex still faced moments of doubt. Some days the fear of failure would creep back in, and he would question whether he was truly improving. But each time those thoughts threatened to take over, he reminded himself of the small victories he had already achieved. The path ahead was still long, and there would be more challenges to come. But Alex knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to give up. By the end of the chapter, Alex had not only deepened his understanding of English, but also discovered something far more important. He had learned that failure was not the end, but a necessary part of the journey. It wasn't about getting everything right the first time. It was about persistence, about showing up every day, even when it felt impossible. And with that lesson in mind, Alex knew he was ready to face whatever challenges came next. As Alex continued his journey of learning English, he reached a point where he knew that reading and listening weren't enough. If he wanted to improve, he had to start speaking the language. The very thought terrified him. Speaking out loud meant facing the possibility of making mistakes, sounding foolish, or worse, realizing that he hadn't made as much progress as he thought. The idea of stumbling over his words, of not being understood, sent a wave of anxiety through him. But he knew that this was the next step he needed to take if he was serious about achieving his dream. One evening, after much internal debate, Alex stood in front of his mirror, determined to practice speaking. His voice came out shaky at first, his words uneven. He repeated simple sentences he had learned, but every time he made a mistake, he cringed. The fear of doing it wrong overshadowed the progress he had made, and for a brief moment he considered stopping, yet something pushed him to keep going. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to let fear hold him back now. Even though his sentences were full of errors, every attempt felt like a small victory. The important thing was that he was trying. Over the next few days, Alex made speaking out loud a part of his routine. He would talk to himself while watching movies, mimicking the characters' dialogue. He practiced pronouncing new words, even if they didn't sound quite right. Slowly, he became more comfortable with the process. The words that once felt awkward on his tongue started to flow more naturally, and though his pronunciation was still far from perfect, he no longer felt paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes. It wasn't about getting it right every time. It was about having the courage to speak up and keep improving. As his confidence in speaking grew, Alex decided to take another leap. He had heard about online communities where people from around the world practiced languages together. It was an opportunity for him to interact with others, to hear different accents, and most importantly, to practice real conversations. Signing up for one of these communities made him nervous. What if they judged him? What if he couldn't keep up with the conversation? The doubts crept in, but he knew that staying in his comfort zone wouldn't help him grow. Alex joined his first online conversation group with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The participants came from different countries, all at various stages of learning English. He sat silently at first, listening to the conversation flow around him. The words moved quickly, faster than he was used to, and there were moments when he struggled to follow along. His nerves built as he prepared to say something. When he finally did, his voice was small and uncertain, but the others in the group listened patiently, encouraging him to keep going. Despite his initial hesitations, the experience was far less intimidating than Alex had imagined. Everyone in the group was there to learn just like him. They supported each other, celebrated small victories, and laughed off mistakes. This sense of community, of being surrounded by others who understood the struggle, made Alex feel less alone in his journey. It wasn't just about learning a language anymore, it was about connecting with people who were on the same path. The more Alex participated in these conversations, the more his confidence grew. He started contributing more, asking questions, and even helping others who were struggling. Each interaction made him feel a little more capable, a little more sure of his ability to speak English. There were still moments when he felt self-conscious, especially when he made a mistake or mispronounced a word. But those moments no longer had the power to derail him. He had learned to embrace the struggle as part of the process. However, the journey wasn't without its setbacks. One day, during a particularly active group discussion, Alex misunderstood a question and gave a completely unrelated answer. The group fell silent for a moment before someone kindly corrected him. His face burned with embarrassment, and the old feelings of inadequacy rushed back. He didn't participate for the rest of the session, ashamed of his mistake. Afterward, he questioned whether he was making any real progress. Was he still the same beginner who struggled to form sentences? The thought of quitting crossed his mind once again, but before he could retreat into self-doubt, a message appeared in the chat. One of the group members reached out to him, offering words of encouragement. They reminded him that everyone makes mistakes, and that's how learning happens. The kindness of that gesture reignited the determination that Alex thought he had lost. He realized that setbacks were inevitable, but they didn't define his journey. He was allowed to stumble, to feel uncertain, but that didn't mean he had failed. The next time Alex joined the group, he felt more at ease. He allowed himself to make mistakes without overthinking them. He spoke up more frequently, even when he wasn't entirely sure of what to say. The more he practiced, the more he realized that fluency wasn't about perfection. It was about communication, about getting the message across, even if the words weren't always right. This shift in mindset allowed him to relax and enjoy the process of learning. As the days passed, Alex noticed significant changes. He was more comfortable speaking, not just in a group, but also in his day-to-day life. He would practice conversations with himself while walking to school or browsing the internet. The fear that once gripped him when he thought about speaking English had lessened. He was still nervous at times, but now that nervousness felt like a challenge to overcome, not an obstacle in his way. By the end of this chapter in his journey, Alex had not only improved his speaking skills, but had also developed a deeper sense of resilience. He understood that fear was part of the process, and the only way to overcome it was to face it head-on. Each time he spoke, whether in front of a mirror or in an online group, he was growing not just as a language learner, but as a person. The challenges he faced, the moments of doubt and fear, were all shaping him into someone stronger, someone who didn't back down when things got tough. With each passing day, Alex was becoming more fluent, not only in English, but also in his own sense of self-confidence. He was beginning to see that the journey was just as important as the destination, and with that realization, he knew that he was ready for whatever came next. After weeks of practicing his English, Alex found himself standing on the edge of a breakthrough. The hard work, the countless hours spent reading, listening, and speaking were finally starting to pay off in ways he could feel. It was subtle, at first a word here, a phrase there, but soon he was able to follow conversations in movies almost effortlessly. One night, while watching a movie he had seen countless times before, Alex realized that he no longer needed the subtitles. He understood the dialogue as it happened, without having to translate each word in his head. A sense of pride swelled inside him. It was a moment of clarity, one that made all the struggles of the past few months feel worthwhile. This newfound confidence fueled Alex's desire to push further. He was no longer content to just watching movies and listening to music. He wanted to dive into more complex English content. So he began reading advanced articles and listening to podcasts on topics that interested him. At first, the material was intimidating. The language was more nuanced, the vocabulary more specialized, but Alex was determined. He approached each new article with patience, breaking down difficult sentences and looking up words he didn't understand. It was slow, but the challenge excited him. Each new word he learned felt like adding another piece to the puzzle. As Alex continued to expand his understanding of English, he noticed a shift not just in his language skills, but in himself. The journey had forced him to develop resilience, patience, and a deeper understanding of his own strengths and weaknesses. Learning English wasn't just about memorizing vocabulary or perfecting grammar. It was about facing challenges head-on, accepting mistakes, and finding the courage to keep going even when things felt impossible. This emotional growth mirrored his progress in the language. He was becoming a more confident, determined person, not just in his studies, but in other aspects of his life as well. But with progress came new challenges. As Alex's skills improved, he started thinking more seriously about his long-term goal, studying at an American university. The dream that had once seemed distant was now within reach, but the closer he got, the more he realized how much work remained. It wasn't just about learning English anymore. There were applications to consider, essays to write, and standardized tests to prepare for. The thought of it all was overwhelming, and for the first time in a while, Alex felt a wave of doubt. He began researching American universities in more detail, looking at application requirements, deadlines, and tuition fees. Each new piece of information brought a mix of excitement and anxiety. The excitement came from knowing that he was getting closer to his dream. The anxiety came from the fear of the unknown. What if his English wasn't good enough? What if he couldn't pass the necessary exams? The doubts gnawed at him, but he tried to push them aside. He reminded himself of how far he had come, of the progress he had made despite the challenges. He couldn't stop now. With a renewed sense of determination, Alex set a new goal for himself: to take an English proficiency test. It was a necessary step if he wanted to apply to universities abroad, and though the thought of it made him nervous, he knew it was something he had to do. The test would be a measure of everything he had worked for, a way to prove to himself that he was capable of achieving his dream, but it also felt like a huge leap. This wasn't just about learning for fun anymore. There were real stakes involved, and the pressure weighed heavily on his mind. The days leading up to the test were filled with a mix of focused preparation and creeping self-doubt. Alex spent hours reviewing vocabulary, practicing listening exercises, and writing essays. He went through practice tests, timing himself to get used to the exam format. But no matter how much he studied, there was always a small voice in the back of his mind telling him he wasn't ready, that he wasn't good enough. He tried to ignore it, but the closer the test date came, the louder the voice grew. On the morning of the test, Alex woke up feeling a knot of anxiety in his stomach. This was it. Everything he had been working toward was about to be put to the test, literally. As he sat down at his desk, the nervousness was palpable. The room felt too quiet, and his thoughts raced faster than he could control. He reminded himself to breathe, to focus on the task at hand. This was just another step in the journey, not the end. The test itself was a blur of questions and answers. There were moments when Alex felt confident, when the answers seemed to flow naturally. But there were also moments of panic, when he stumbled over a question or couldn't remember a word he knew he had studied. The time pressure didn't help. As the clock ticked down, Alex found himself rushing through the final sections, hoping that he had done enough. After the test, there was nothing left to do but wait. The anticipation was agonizing. For days, Alex replayed the exam in his head, second-guessing his answers and wondering if he had made too many mistakes. But as the days passed, he realized that there was nothing more he could do. He had done his best, and whatever the outcome, he had grown in the process. The test was just one part of the journey, and he had already come so far. When the test results finally arrived, Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he opened the email. His eyes scanned the page, searching for the score. When he saw it, relief washed over him. He had passed. The feeling was overwhelming, a mixture of pride, joy, and disbelief. All the hard work, the late nights, the moments of doubt, they had all been worth it. His dream of studying at an American university was now within reach. But as Alex sat there, staring at the results, he realized something important. The test, the university, the dream, they were all just milestones. What mattered more was the journey he had taken to get here, the challenges he had faced, the fears he had overcome, the person he had become along the way. That was the real achievement. And with that realization, Alex knew that his journey was far from over. There were still more challenges ahead, more dreams to pursue. But for the first time, he felt ready to face them with confidence. As the chapter came to a close, Alex looked forward to the future, not with fear or uncertainty, but with a sense of hope and determination. He had learned that progress wasn't about reaching a final destination. It was about the growth that happened along the way. And with that knowledge, he was ready to take the next step, whatever it might be. The days leading up to the test had been filled with anxiety, anticipation, and relentless preparation. Alex had thrown himself into his studies, determined to leave no room for error. He reviewed grammar rules, practiced listening exercises, and wrote essays until his fingers ached. Yet, despite all his efforts, the fear of failure lingered in the back of his mind. The night before the test, sleep eluded him as his mind raced with thoughts of what could go wrong. This test felt like the culmination of everything he had worked for, a measure of his worth, and the weight of that realization was almost unbearable. When the morning of the test finally arrived, Alex woke up early, his heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. He knew that this day would mark a turning point in his journey, no matter the outcome. As he sat at his desk, logging into the online testing platform, a quiet sense of determination settled over him. He had prepared for this moment, and now it was time to face it head-on. The instructions appeared on the screen, and before he knew it, the test had begun. The first section was listening comprehension. As the audio played, Alex focused intently, straining to catch every word and nuance in the conversation. His nerves made it hard to concentrate at first, but soon he found his rhythm. The voices on the recording were clear, and to his surprise, he understood most of what was being said. He answered each question with growing confidence, and by the time the section ended, he felt a sense of relief. It was one small victory in a much larger battle. Next came the reading comprehension section, which presented a new set of challenges. The texts were dense, filled with unfamiliar vocabulary and complex sentence structures. Alex took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm and methodical. He read each passage carefully, breaking down difficult words and trying to grasp the overall meaning. Some questions were easier than others, but there were moments when doubt crept in. Was he interpreting the text correctly? Was he missing something important? He pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. As the test progressed, the writing section loomed ahead. This was the part Alex had been most anxious about. Writing in English required a level of precision that speaking and listening didn't. Every word, every sentence, had to be crafted carefully. When the prompt appeared on the screen, Alex hesitated for a moment, reading it over and over to make sure he understood. Then, with a deep breath, he began to write. The words flowed slowly at first, but as he gained momentum, his ideas started to take shape. He structured his essay as best he could, focusing on clarity and coherence rather than trying to impress with fancy vocabulary. He knew his writing wasn't perfect. There were likely errors in grammar and phrasing, but he poured his heart into the essay, determined to show how much he had learned. As the timer counted down, Alex finished the final sentence and submitted the section just in time. The final part of the test was speaking. Alex's stomach twisted into knots as he prepared to record his answers. Speaking under pressure had always been his greatest fear, and now he had to do it with the added stress of knowing that every word he said would be judged. He clicked the record button and, after a brief pause, began to speak. His voice trembled at first, but as he continued, he found his footing. He spoke slowly and deliberately, focusing on enunciating each word clearly. There were moments when he stumbled, searching for the right phrase or correcting himself mid-sentence, but he pushed through, determined to finish strong. When the test finally ended, Alex sat back in his chair, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over him. It was done. All the months of preparation, the countless hours spent studying, had led to this moment. He had given it his all, and now all that was left to do was wait for the results. As he logged out of the testing platform, a sense of relief mixed with uncertainty settled over him. Had he done enough? Had all his efforts been worth it? The waiting was agonizing. Each day that passed without hearing the results felt like an eternity. Alex replayed the test in his mind, analyzing every question, every answer, wondering if he had made too many mistakes. But as time went on, he realized that there was nothing more he could do. He had faced the challenge, and whether he passed or failed, he had grown from the experience. The test was just one part of his journey, not the final destination. When the email with the test results finally arrived, Alex's hand shook as he clicked it open. His heart raced as his eyes scanned the page, searching for the score, and then he saw it. He had passed. A wave of emotions crashed over him: relief, pride, disbelief. He had done it. The dream that had once seemed impossible was now within reach. All the late nights, the moments of self-doubt, the struggles and setbacks had led to this moment of triumph. But as Alex sat there, staring at the results, he realized something profound. The test, the score, the dream of studying at an American university, they were all important, but they weren't the true measure of his success. What mattered more was the journey he had taken to get here. The lessons he had learned about perseverance, about facing fear, about pushing through even when things seemed impossible. The process of learning had changed him in ways far beyond mastering a language. It had taught him resilience, patience, and the value of hard work. In that moment, Alex understood that the journey itself was just as important as the goal. He had achieved something far more valuable than a passing score. He had grown as a person. And with that realization came a sense of peace. His journey wasn't over, but he was ready for whatever came next. The challenges ahead no longer felt daunting. They felt like opportunities to continue growing, to keep learning, to keep pushing himself toward new heights. As he closed his laptop and stepped outside, Alex felt a sense of freedom he hadn't felt in a long time. The future stretched out before him, full of possibilities, and for the first time he faced it with confidence. He had learned that success wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. And with that knowledge, he knew that no matter what challenges came his way, he was ready to face them. The journey had transformed him, and as he took his next steps, Alex knew that the most important lesson he had learned was this: the journey itself is the reward.